topic that I'm going to talk about is 6 Gestalt principles. Tragnatz is the term that the Gestalt psychologist gave to this set of principles back in the early 20th century when they developed this system of visual organization. So Tragnatz is a German word that translates to something like salience, conciseness, or orderliness. And I think that many of these principles are actually ones that you might be familiar with. There's a very famous book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud that's widely read in media studies classes. I remember reading it as a student in a media studies class and just being totally taken by these very profound insights into the organization of visual information. And I didn't learn until later, or I didn't really pay attention until later, that these visual principles actually came from Gestalt psychology. And the Gestalt psychologists wanted to take an empirical approach. They wanted to really analyze, how do we see things? How can we quantify how we see things? So the first law in this set of laws is the law of proximity. And I think I have to apologize if the boxes with our own images are blocking some of the slides here. But the law of proximity says that if you have a group of things, it's a tendency to group things if they are closer together, like these dots. Let me give you a real world example. Take the Adidas logo, for example. If the Adidas logo had 3 stripes that were separated, it wouldn't be as convincing. At least I think it wouldn't be as convincing as if you see them close together. Your mind wants to group them together because they're close. In the photograph on the right side, you can see the seagulls, and they're in 2 distinct groups. The seagulls are on the beach, and your eyes want to see them together. The next law is the law of similarity. And it's a little bit similar to the law of proximity, but in this case, we want to see things together because they're similar. If you look at the box of dots now, there are 2 colors instead of just one. They're black and they're white. So most people see them as a line of white, a line of black, a line of white, a line of black. And you have to question, why do I see it this way? It's a kind of psychological tendency of humans to do this. Often we find this kind of thing in logos. For example, the Olympics logo. You want to group the circles together, even though they're not necessarily continuous. But the colors are similar, and so you want to see them together. I'm sure everybody has seen the NBC logo, and this is a kind of play on the NBC logo, and you have to ask, why doesn't this one work? Usually the bird in the middle is a kind of negative space, and your eyes want to group the feathers on either side. But here the negative space is around each of the feathers. And so it almost looks like a circus tent, this continuous space in the middle. The next law is the law of closure. And this was, I think, Scott McCloud's one of his favorite laws in the book Understanding Comics, because when you see a shape, your eye wants to fill it in. It wants to make a total shape. It's this human tendency to complete the shape. And this becomes really important in something like photography because photographers deal with landscapes, things in the world, which are not always as easy to organize as systems of dots or corporate logos. This example with the kiwi fruits is kind of funny, actually. It would be easy to do in your own kitchen to experiment with these Gestalt principles of closure. I'm not sure if you can see the picture on the right. It's actually the Golden Gate Bridge. And in the picture, it forms a triangle between the rocks and the bridge. And then the shapes in the bridge also make triangles, which is a kind of interesting visual passage. And this shows you how your eye wants to complete shapes, even if the shapes don't exist. The law of symmetry is the next one. And this one is a little bit tricky. It's one thing to say that an object is symmetrical. Like you see the picture of the Taj Mahal, right? It's this glorious building and it's totally symmetrical. That's easy to see. That's symmetry. But sometimes if something is symmetrical in a larger pattern, it's interesting to see how your eyes will pick out a pattern from this larger image simply because it's symmetrical. On screen right now, there's some groups of parentheses and brackets. And even though these are just shapes, your eyes want to group them brackets, parentheses, brackets. When you start talking about photography, it becomes an even more complicated and fun game. You can see maybe the flower on the left here. There's all kinds of symmetry going on, right? North-south symmetry, east-west symmetry. But the dividing line on the one on the right is right down the middle. And so we kind of lose the north-south symmetry in favor of the east-west symmetry in the flower on the right. I don't know if you can see the law of symmetry photograph example that I have because our pictures are covering it up. But the right half of the picture is the same as the left, except there's some highlighting. For example, these trees are kind of symmetrical in comparison to these trees. And so it's like your mind wants to group the trees together. Similarly, our minds like to group things based on trajectories of motion or perceived motion. We have A and X in this picture, and they're just some dots moving in a line. When you think about it, your mind could group these dots any number of ways. It really could. But we like to see the dots in a line like this. You could apply this even to something like animation or cartoons. Our mind wants to put these pictures together to see a jumping person here on the left. On the right, we see the trails from the boats in the water, and that gives us an indication of where the boats are going to go. Our eyes tell us that the boats going in the same direction should be grouped together. Why this is a mystery, really, when you think about it. And that's what the Gestalt psychologists were trying to find out in their experiments with subjects and numbers and statistics, where they analyzed these laws. The law of continuity is the next law of these Gestalt psychologists. It's also known as the law of good continuation. Sometimes we can have more than one object that are intersecting, and our minds want to put them together simply because they are intersecting. They're perceived as a, quote, perceptual whole because they're next to one another. Like this very simple picture of these grasses in this misty lake. If you look carefully, the top part of the grass is actually the grass, and this part of the grass is its reflection. Our mind sees this as a single stick until maybe you notice it's hard to see at this size, but there's some ripples in the water. You have to look closely to really make your mind make the jump. Law of continuity maybe even applies to trees. How many leaves are on every tree that you see? You have to be a photographer or an artist to see them as individual leaves. Most people, maybe even I, look at them and see, oh, that's a tree. I don't see it as look up in the sky or outside my house and say, oh, look, I have a collection of leaves hanging off of this branch. It's just a tree. The law of continuity might describe that. Well, tonight I have introduced just a few of the visual grouping principles that the Gestalt psychologists developed in the early 20th century to help people understand why they see things in a certain way. The Gestalt psychologist had many other visual principles and many other psychological models that they developed. This is just a very small, tiny part of their, what do you want to say, repertoire of psychological forms of analysis. But this is a key set of principles that designers and people in advertising or artists or art historians or anyone interested in visual communication can apply to understanding why certain designs are more convincing than others. Why are certain logos the ones that jump out and cost a lot of money? Why are certain designs anywhere more attractive or appealing? So the Gestalt psychologist definitely gave us some introduction to how to answer these questions. Thank you.